Part 12. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 111. Rose, do you want to be Chen Tao's woman? Chen Tao was stunned for a moment. He looked at Rose and said, "You are the king of black demons, you can have any man you want, right?" Rose heard this. She crossed her arms and said a little depressed, "I have seen many men in the past 5 million years, but none of them can catch my eye, let alone control me. I am the king of black demons, the queen of chaos. If you want to get me, you must have some skills." As she said, Rose looked at Chen Tao and said, "In the past 5 million years, you are the only one who can make me feel amazing." Well, it is estimated that Rose wants to find someone stronger than her. But in the known universe, it seems that only Katie is stronger than Rose. The problem is that Katie is a woman and her enemy. Naturally, in this huge universe, no one can catch her eye. For Rose, perhaps only Chen Tao is a man who can interest her. No wonder she said that just now. Chen Tao was silent for a while and said, "I already have a lover, and there are more than one woman around me." Rose raised her eyebrows slightly and said, "I don't care about this. I am not from your Earth star. I am the queen of chaos, and I have no taboos. I want to be your woman, that's all. As for how many women are around you, I don't care." Rose showed a playful smile, looked at Chen Tao with fiery eyes, and said, "If I can conceive a child with your genes, I think as long as I teach him more, he can probably become the master of the universe." Chen Tao glanced at Rose and said, "It's up to you, but you should change your identity as the Queen of Chaos." Rose smiled and said, "From now on, I will call myself Chen Tao's woman." Fortunately, Chen Tao didn't drink the water, otherwise he would probably spray out water when he saw Rose saying such arrogant words. Chen Tao was too lazy to pay attention to this woman. Chen Tao's goal was to obtain the information he wanted from Rose, and at the same time let Rose know how powerful he was, so that she would not dare to attack Earthstar easily. Chen Tao didn't know what Rose did in the universe, nor did he care. For Chen Tao, Rose's revenge on him was just a vengeance for the knife, and he had just sent this vengeance back. Now he has written off all his grievances with Rose. Now Rose wants to be Chen Tao's woman, and for Chen Tao, this is her business. Whatever she wants. As long as Chen Tao can get what he wants from Rose, it's fine. "Let's go," Chen Tao reminded Rose. Rose was slightly startled. She looked at the nebula in front of her and said, "Is it reliable to put this thing here?" Chen Tao said, "Don't worry, only the two of us can see it now. Others can't find it through any detection system. Even if the nebula is discovered 10,000 times backwards, with the known universe's obvious technology, nothing can destroy it. The technology of the nebula is too exaggerated, and it doesn't look like something from the known universe at all. Its existence is like a bug. The known universe, let alone detecting the nebula with high-tech hidden capabilities, even if they find it, they have no way to deal with it." Chen Tao is completely relieved about the nebula. Listening to Chen Tao's words, Rose nodded, "Okay." At this moment, the surrounding environment suddenly changed. Rose came to her senses and found that she was back on the deck. As soon as she returned to the deck, Chiao, who had escaped, hurriedly raised the long sword in his hand and pointed it at Rose. Watching Chiao's actions, Rose's eyebrows slightly opened, and she stretched out her hand and said, "Okay, okay." Chiao was stunned. She frowned, and said, "What's okay?" "Rose, we dragons represent the balance of the universe, and you represent the chaos of the universe. Only one of you and us dragons can survive in the known universe. In the war, either you die or I die," Chiao said firmly. Chen Tao looked at the dragon man named Chiao in front of him. Chiao was born with a lovable look. When she was expressionless, the luster in her big eyes made people want to save her. And now when she was serious, she frowned, and she was still full of heroism. She was not afraid of death even when she was talking about it. She was worthy of being a warrior. When Rose heard this, she said, "It was like this before, but it's not like this now." When Xiao heard this, she blinked and looked at Rose. "What do you mean?" Rose crossed her arms and said, "I'm tired of fighting and don't want to fight anymore." Xiao was stunned and a little stunned. "What did you say?" "Humph, don't fight if you want to? Do you think the cosmic war is a joke? You represent the chaos of the universe. You must be eradicated." Rose glanced at Xiao casually. She walked towards Chen Tao on her own, then naturally put her arm around Chen Tao's arm, and leaned her little head on Chen Tao's shoulder. She looked at Xiao, who was a little confused, and said, "I have given up my faith. Now I am not the queen of chaos, nor am I a threat to you. I am just a little woman in love." "What? You dragons keep saying that you want to maintain the balance of the universe, and now you want to kill even a little girl like me?" Xiao was stunned and opened his mouth wide. His face was full of disbelief. For Xiao, people's faith is more important than life. Giving up faith is no different from death. Xiao knew that Rose was the queen of chaos, and her belief was to create chaos. In the past 5 million years, the Black Demon civilization led by Rose had fought countless battles with the Dragon civilization for their different beliefs. Rose was killed 5 times in these million years. But because of her special body, she was resurrected again and again. Xiao knew very well that Rose could be killed, but Rose's belief would never waver. And now Rose had just left Chen Tao not long ago. Coming back again, Rose gave up all her beliefs. Shocking. This was probably the most shocking day for Xiao, a young warrior who had only lived for more than 300 years. Xiao slowly put away the long sword and looked at Chen Tao, her eyes trembling. It was this man. It was obvious that the reason why Rose gave up this belief was because of this man. This man actually tore Rose's beliefs apart and directly destroyed Rose's beliefs. Without her chaotic beliefs, Rose would be no threat to the dragon people who were responsible for maintaining the balance of the known universe, which meant that she was an existence that did not need to be eliminated. In this way, the war between the dragon civilization and the black demon civilization that spanned 5 million years seemed meaningless. Joe suspected that Rose was lying, but according to Rose's previous habits, Rose would not lie, and she had no need to lie. Incomprehensible. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 112. Joe fell silent. After a long while, she looked at Rose and said, "Then you're black demons." Rose said, "I will let them find a habitable planet, live there, and multiply. Make some contribution to the prosperity of the universe." Joe fell silent again. Xiao adjusted his mood and said calmly, "I understand." She looked at Rose and said, "I hope you will sincerely repent this time, otherwise, our dragon people's sword will be placed on your neck again." With that said, Xiao spread her wings and flew into the sky. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Then I'll leave first." Chen Tao nodded slightly. Xiao spread her wings, and a miniature wormhole appeared in front of her. She flew into the miniature wormhole and disappeared from Chen Tao's sight. Seeing this scene, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. Cardi is the only one in the known universe who can hold a sword around her neck. She probably isn't qualified yet, Rose beside her seemed to be saying to herself. Chen Tao looked at Rose. Rose noticed Chen Tao's gaze, she smiled, and said, "Good man, let's seize the time. I want to get pregnant with your child as soon as possible." Too direct. Chen Tao had never seen such a straightforward woman before. He said, "Before that, I want to ask you a few questions." Rose hummed and said with a smile, "Okay." "Tao, who is she?" came a voice from the side. Chen Tao came back to his senses and saw Zi Qing, He Yuxuan and Wu Yao. The 3 girls were looking over here. There was doubt in his eyes. When Rose looked at it, she smiled and said, Let me introduce myself. My name is Rose. I am, the Black Demon. Well, she should be Chen Tao's new woman. Rose smiled and said, we will be sisters from now on. I am older, so you can call me Sister Rose. Ziyi blinked. He Yuxuan and Wu Yao looked at each other. He Yuxuan crossed her chest with her hands and a smile appeared on her face. My husband is so charming, he can even enchant beauties from aliens. Wu Yao also came to her senses and looked at Rose with a friendly smile. Ziyi on the side also had a smile on her face and said, I am Ziyi, welcome to you. He Yuxuan said, I am He Yuxuan. I am Wu Yao said. Rose smiled, looked at Chen Tao and said, sisters are quite friendly. Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, go to the room first. If you want to talk, it's not that convenient to stand on this deck and feel the wind blowing. It's better to go back to your room. Chen Tao took the girls back to the bedroom. Chen Tao's bedroom is as big as half a basketball court. When 5 people come in, they won't feel crowded and it is actually very spacious. Chen Tao sat on the sofa and looked at Rose. He originally wanted Rose to sit in front so that he could easily ask questions, but Rose walked over directly and sat beside Chen Tao, half of her body leaning on Chen Tao's arms. The 3 Ziking girls on the side saw this scene. He Yuxuan couldn't help but smile on her face and looked at Wu Yao. Wu Yao also smiled. Ziyi was sitting on the sofa beside her, looking here with a smile on her face. Chen Tao looked at Rose beside him. She was very close. Chen Tao could smell Rose's unique body fragrance, which was like the faint fragrance of roses. She sat next to Chen Tao, nestled in Chen Tao's arms, raised her face slightly, and looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes. Those eyes were filled with extraordinary brightness, and the corners of her face and mouth were slightly raised. Her eyes were looking at Chen Tao. It seemed that in her eyes, Chen Tao was the only one left in the entire universe. Chen Tao could see full of love through Rose's eyes. This, Chen Tao couldn't understand. He had only met Rose twice. Is it possible that her enthusiasm reached this level just because of these 2 meetings? Now Rose was like fire, seeming to engulf Chen Tao. This kind of enthusiasm is somewhat difficult for Chen Tao to understand. Chen Tao said, what's wrong with you? Rose said, what's wrong? Chen Tao said, you said you fell in love with me, I can understand it, but you are not so enthusiastic, right? Hearing this, the corners of Rose's mouth slightly raised, and she said, why not? I have been single for 5 million years. You have an idiom called, dry wood and strong fire. I am a burning fire now, it's rare to meet you, so of course I have to enthusiasm. 5 million years, according to Earth stars, she is already very old. But compared with the age of the universe, which is already hundreds of billions, she is still very young. And from the outside, Rose has a curvy figure that is comparable to a devil, and a face that is delicate and beautiful, as delicate as a girl. The skin color is light gray, and the pointed ears add to the exotic look. Her skin was as delicate as a baby's, as if it were made of water. Her beauty can be found in the earth and stars. If you don't tell her real age, judging from the aesthetics of Earth people, she is at most in her early 20s. Very enchanting and watery. And Rose looked at Chen Tao and said, you have deprived me of my faith and my goals. Now I only have you. Now to me, the universe doesn't matter, you are me. Of course, I have to keep an eye on you all the time, and feel it all the time. Rose looked at Chen Tao's face and landed on Chen Tao's lips. Her eyes were full of luster, and her face slowly came closer. Chen Tao turned his face away from Rose and said, I understand. Looking at Chen Tao's actions, Rose was slightly startled. She pursed her lips, smiled and said, don't you have something to ask? Hearing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, I want to know what other civilizations are there in the known universe besides the Dragon civilization, the Black Demon civilization and the Kurt civilization. Well, a lot. Rose smiled and said, if you want to know, I can tell you, but I have a request. Chen Tao was slightly startled. He looked at Rose. What request? Rose looked at Chen Tao. She showed a playful smile and said, kiss, then ask. Chen Tao was startled. This? Rose raised her little hand and stroked Chen Tao's face. Her hands were small. Chen Tao could feel the smallness of her palms, and could also feel the softness of her little hands. Rose's eyelashes trembled, and she slowly moved her face closer. Kissed her lips. Lips parted. There was water vapor flowing in Rose's eyes, and she smiled on her face, looking a little happy. Chen Tao said, can you tell me now? Rose pursed her lips and said with a smile, There are many civilizations in the universe. If you want to count them, you probably can't count them all. Because hundreds of millions of light years away, new civilizations are being born now. Rose looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, if I want to talk about civilizations, I should say the civilization closest to the Earth. The closest to the Earth civilization is the Star Sea civilization. She moved closer to Chen Tao and said, the people of the Star Sea civilization currently live on a blue planet with an ocean coverage area of 93%. They all have fins like fish, their lower bodies are like fish, but their upper bodies are like humans. They are amphibious creatures, but they have wisdom. She looked at Chen Tao with a smile on her face. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 113. Isn't that a mermaid? Ziking's eyes lit up slightly, and she asked curiously. Rose looked at Ziking, and she smiled and said, well, it's a bit like the mermaid in your mythology. However, they are a civilization that was born not long ago, and they are still in the cold weapon era. Compared with you as a pre-nuclear civilization, there is still a distance. Chen Tao's hand was not easy to put, so he could only put it on Rose's waist. He looked at Rose and said, in addition to the Star Sea civilization, what civilizations are closest to the Earth civilization and can threaten the Earth? Well, if you want to threaten the Earth civilization, you can only reach the aerospace civilization or a civilization above the aerospace civilization. Rose said, you know what, there is really one. Rose said, the name is called the Earth civilization. The humans of the Earth civilization are somewhat similar to the Earth people. They have already reached the space class civilization. At the same time, their civilization yearns for peace, and this belief will not change in a short time. In the short term, it will not threaten you. Rose looked at Chen Tao with big eyes, and she smiled and said, besides, don't worry. Now you and I are in charge of the Earth Star. The only one who can compete with me in the known universe is Kadi of the Dragon civilization. Apart from that, there is no other. I am here, and other civilizations dare not mess around. And there is you. Unless those civilizations want to be destroyed, they will not be so stupid. After speaking, Rose kissed Chen Tao's cheek, and she said, good man, have you finished asking questions? Let's do some business. She was like a kitten, with her little head leaning on Chen Tao's shoulder, and her big eyes looking at Chen Tao infatuatedly. Business. It is estimated that the business in Rose's mouth will be a little bit not serious. Chen Tao still has many questions. For example, where did the nebula come from? But looking at Rose's expression, Rose herself didn't know. Forget it. Chen Tao thought, or slowly ask her later. Chen Tao picked Rose up horizontally. Rose snuggled in Chen Tao's arms and looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes. Chen Tao put Rose on the bed. Rose put her arms around Chen Tao's neck, and she looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes, with an expectant smile on her face. The next morning, a ray of sunlight poured in from the window of Chen Tao's room and fell on the ground. Chen Tao felt the light, and his biological clock woke him up. Chen Tao slowly opened his eyes and looked at the familiar ceiling above. This is the room of base number 1. Chen Tao has lived in base number 1 for a while. This period of time is the most relaxing and comfortable time in Chen Tao's life. He just eats, drinks and sleeps every day, and basically doesn't need to do anything. As time goes by, Chen Tao has become familiar with the environment in base number 1. Chen Tao still has a doubt now, and this doubt has never been answered. Where did the nebula come from? Suddenly, Chen Tao felt a movement around him. Chen Tao turned his head to look. It was a beautiful face. Although her skin color was different from that of ordinary people, her skin was delicate and her facial features were exquisite and flawless. Narrow eyelashes, big eyes, full of charm. Looking down, that was Rose's mature and perfect figure. Her beauty was hard to find on this planet. Rose had woken up, looking at Chen Tao with big eyes full of joy, with the corners of her mouth slightly raised, and said with a smile, "Dear, what are you thinking about?" Chen Tao slightly turned sideways, gently stroked her hair, put it behind her ears, slowly stroked her cheek, and said, "I'm thinking about a question." "What question?" Rose asked in a greasy voice, slowly leaning her body into Chen Tao's arms, looking very dependent. Chen Tao said, "Nebula, where does it come from?" Rose raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. Rose pursed her lips and said, "Well, I'm actually a little confused. This universe is actually trillions of years old, but the oldest civilization in the universe, the Floerman civilization, is only more than 10 million years old." Rose looked at Chen Tao and said, "The Floerman civilization has been destroyed, and the oldest civilization left is the Dragon Man civilization. It has only been 7 million years since the Dragon Man civilization." Rose said, "There has always been this question in this universe. Why is the universe trillions of years old, but the oldest known civilization is only tens of millions of years old? Then what about the period before that? Didn't other civilizations exist?" Hearing this, Chen Tao was silent. Indeed, what Rose said was right. The universe has experienced such a long time, but the oldest known civilization is only tens of millions of years old. This is not right. Rose said, "At present, things that happened tens of millions of years ago can no longer be traced. But we can boldly guess that perhaps tens of millions of years ago, there were various civilizations that were older, had a longer history, and had more advanced technology than the current ones. It was just because of certain things that those civilizations were destroyed. And, the nebula you have is very likely the product left behind by those ancient civilizations." This is Rose's guess, but this guess makes Chen Tao feel numb. If it is really as you guessed, it comes from those unknown ancient civilizations in the past, then why did those civilizations perish? How terrible would it be to have a catastrophic event that could destroy the existence of a nebula? Rose pursed her lips and nodded slightly, "Yes, actually, I don't quite understand this." "Never mind." Rose leaned close to Chen Tao's face, her big eyes were playful, she smiled and said, "Don't think too much about the future, the important thing is now, dear." She leaned close to Chen Tao, looking at the moisture in Rose's eyes full of expectation. Chen Tao smiled, leaned down and kissed her. After dealing with the invasion from the Kurt Galaxy and the invasion of the Black Demon civilization, Chen Tao also resumed his leisurely life. But this leisurely life did not last long. Only 3 short days have passed, and this leisurely life has been destroyed. At this time, Chen Tao was walking on the deck and looking at the scenery in the sky. Rose beside him followed Chen Tao, holding Chen Tao's arm, and followed Chen Tao obediently. The deck of the battleship is very large, much larger than the playground. There is nothing strange about walking here. Chen Tao walked to the railing and stopped, looking at the scenery outside. Rose leaned forward and stood beside Chen Tao with half of her body leaning against him. She held Chen Tao's hand and hugged her waist. She leaned into Chen Tao's arms, adjusted herself, and found a comfortable position to lean against him. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. Their eyes met. Rose's eyes were full of joy. Master, suddenly, a voice sounded in Chen Tao's mind. Who was this voice? T1. T1 was responsible for guarding the Earth star in the sky, and she was as powerful as Katie. Generally speaking, T1 would not contact Chen Tao if it was not important. What's wrong? T1 said, there is a woman who claims to be from the dragon civilization, Lin. She said she wants to see you. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 114. Lin. Chen Tao said, bring her over. She said that besides her, there is also her queen coming over, and she wants you to meet her in the sky, Master, T1 said. Queen. Katie. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. He looked at Rose beside him. Rose smiled and said, I had guessed that she would come. Let's go and see it together. Upon hearing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly. The two figures disappeared into thin air. When they reappeared, the two appeared next to T1. In front of Chen Tao, he could see a female dragon with dragon wings, wearing soft armor and holding a long sword. That female dragon is none other than Lin. When Lin saw Chen Tao appear, she had a smile on her face, but when she saw Rose next to Chen Tao, her eyebrows wrinkled slightly. Rose, what are you playing? Lin frowned, looking a little angry. She looked at Chen Tao and said, my dear, don't believe her. She is Rose, representing the chaos of the universe. She is it's impossible to change. Hearing this, Rose's eyebrows slightly stretched, with a smile on her face, she said, I remember you, you are Katie's left guard Lin. Well, I know you have misunderstood me, but misunderstandings are okay. Solved. Lin frowned and looked at Rose. Lin, let me talk to them. An indifferent voice sounded slowly. Chen Tao raised his face and looked forward. Katie was sitting on a bench, and the bench was placed above a battleship that looked like a giant sword. The battleship was slowly approaching. Katie was wearing soft armor and a golden cloak. She was sitting on it, high up, as if she was indifferent to everything below. When Lin heard Katie's voice, she lowered her head slightly, spread her wings, and flew to Katie's side. Katie looked at Chen Tao and Rose below, and her eyes fell on Rose. She said expressionlessly, Rose, the way you dress is not like the you I knew before. Rose stayed in Earthstar for a while and was very interested in Earthstar's clothes. Rose is now wearing a white shirt, very casual. Although she was dressed casually, this simple outfit perfectly set off her temperament. The whole thing exudes a mature and beautiful atmosphere, full of charm. But the problem is, in Katie's memory. Every time she saw Rose, Rose was wearing a suit of clothing that was convenient for movement. As a warrior, of course, she had to wear strong clothing to face the enemy, so that it would be easier to fight. But now Rose is wearing casual clothes. This is the first time Katie has seen her, and it feels a little strange. Rose crossed her arms, looked at Katie, smiled, and said, you don't understand, right? In Earthstar parlance, if you marry a chicken, you will follow the chicken, if you marry a dog, you will follow the dog. What does my man want me to do? I will do whatever I want. Rose looked at Chen Tao and said, my man doesn't intend to conquer the world, nor does he intend to do anything else. I don't have to fight anymore. If I don't have to fight, it doesn't matter what I wear, as long as my man likes it. Rose looked at Katie, she showed a playful smile and said, of course, an old woman like you who has lived for millions of years and has never touched a man probably doesn't understand what it's like. Chiao on the side listened, frowned his eyebrows, flapped his wings, and was about to take action. Katie raised her hand to stop Joe. Katie said, "We are not here to seek war, we are just here to confirm one thing." Katie looked at Rose and said, "Have you really given up on pursuing your beliefs?" Rose said, "Didn't I tell your woman named Longren Chiao before?" "Why, she didn't tell you." "I have already reported what you said to the queen." When Dragon Man Chiao heard this, she was unhappy and immediately spoke out. Rose's eyebrows relaxed slightly. She looked at Katie and said, "Now that I've said it, why do you come to ask me?" Katie squinted her eyes, stared at Rose, and said arrogantly, "I'm just very surprised that you persisted in your beliefs for 5 million years. You died 5 times in these 500 years, but even if death didn't make you change your beliefs. As a result, now you have changed your beliefs because of a man." Katie looked at Rose and said, "I can't understand it, and I feel incredible. Of course I have to use my own eyes for things that I can't understand. See for yourself." Rose walked up to Chen Tao and put her hand around Chen Tao's arm. She looked at Katie and said, "Now that you have seen it, why don't you go back quickly?" When Katie heard it, she said, "No, I haven't seen it clearly yet. Before I can see it clearly, I have to ask you a question first." Katie stared at Rose and said, "Aren't you going to take care of the expansion of the universe?" When Rose heard this, her eyebrows slightly stretched and she said, "The expansion of the universe is a theorem of nature and cannot be controlled. Since there is no way to control it, what should I do? I don't want to do useless work." Katie was stunned. "Those female dragons next to you, look at me and I'll look at you." Everyone was surprised and puzzled. What Rose is saying now is exactly what the dragon civilization said to attack Rose before, but Rose at the time didn't believe it at all. He even stubbornly believes that chaos is the key to saving the universe. But now Rose actually said these words herself? This kind of thing is completely out of the dragon people's understanding of Rose. As the king of Tianlong civilization, Kadi was also a little surprised. Katie looked at Rose and said, "What you said goes against your previous beliefs. Didn't you say that only through chaos can the universe return to its former chaos and can it prevent the expansion of the universe?" Hearing this, Rose said, "That's my ignorance." Katie fell silent again. The one speaking now is Rose. The queen of the Black Demon civilization, the extremely arrogant and confident queen of the Black Demon. And now this confident and arrogant queen of the Black Demon civilization actually denies herself and calls herself ignorant. Katie's brain stopped moving. In just a few minutes, Rose's words were like a bombshell, making Katie feel dizzy. She never expected that the queen of the Black Demon civilization, who had fought a war with her dragon civilization for 5 million years for her own beliefs, would actually say such words. Incredible. Rose smiled and said, "I discovered that belief is really boring." She looked at Chen Tao beside her, slowly leaned her body into Chen Tao's arms, then looked at Katie and said, "It's more interesting to stay with the man I love than to run around for ignorant beliefs." Katie looked at the scene and was silent for a moment. "Queen, what should I do?" Lin looked at Katie. Lin just thought that Rose must have bad intentions, but she saw with her own eyes the love shown in Rose's eyes towards Chen Tao. Lin couldn't understand either. Could it be that Rose has really been conquered by Chen Tao? Katie looked at Rose and said, "My last question is, if the universe expands to its limit and explodes, will you really not care? My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 115. Rose looked at Katie, she smiled and said, "My man has the ability to rebuild the universe. If that day really comes, the worst that can happen is to hide in the new universe." Rebuild the universe, Katie was stunned, she couldn't help but say it out loud, her eyes finally fell on Chen Tao, her eyes were full of disbelief. At this moment, Katie finally understood, she finally knew why Rose gave up this belief. If Chen Tao has the ability to rebuild the universe, it means that everything Rose does will be superfluous and meaningless. Naturally, Rose's belief is useless. Useless beliefs can only be abandoned. However, Katie couldn't believe that this human from a pre-nuclear civilization could do that. She couldn't believe it. Although she had seen Chen Tao's power, it was still difficult for her to believe that Chen Tao could rebuild the universe. Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, "Can you rebuild the universe?" Chen Tao looked at Katie and said, "If there are no accidents, it should be possible." Katie frowned, "This is impossible, it's ridiculous." Believe it or not, Rose didn't intend to let Katie know the existence of the nebula. She said, "You have asked all the questions you want to ask, and we have answered you. As for whether you want to believe it or not, that's your business. Honey, let's go back and do business." Rose took Chen Tao's arm and opened the micro-wormhole. Chen Tao looked at Rose, retracted his gaze, and the two entered the micro-wormhole. Looking at the gradually closing micro-wormhole, Katie frowned, "Rebuilding the universe, this is impossible, this is impossible." Even as the king of the dragon civilization, Katie couldn't think of creating a universe. This was completely unbelievable to her. Katie adjusted her breathing, slowly sat on the chair, leaned against the back of the chair, and closed her eyes. After recovering from the shock, Katie said, "Lin." Lin flew to Katie, bowed and said, "Queen." Katie said, "Before, I heard Xiao say that you like that man." Lin was slightly startled, and she nodded slightly, "He is a man I approve of." Katie said, "Well, from now on you are his dragon girl." Lin was startled and looked at Katie. Lin felt a little uneasy. Did the queen intend to let her stay with Chen Tao and monitor him? If so, it was completely inconsistent with Lin's values. Female dragons only follow one man in their lives, and they believe that man is everything to her. Lin can't do anything to betray Chen Tao. Katie looked at Lin and said, "I know what you are worried about. I don't want you to monitor Chen Tao, nor do I want you to do anything to him. What I want is for you to keep an eye on Rose and don't let Rose hurt Chen Tao." Lin's eyes lit up slightly, she nodded slightly, and said, "Okay. If it was just to monitor Rose, who was once the Queen of Chaos, then the meaning would naturally be completely different." Katie nodded slightly and said, "You stay, then go back." The warship slowly turned around, and Katie took the other female dragons around her and flew into the sky. Gradually disappeared from Lin's sight. Lin watched them leave until she could no longer see them, then she flapped her wings and flew down. Katie sat on a chair, looking at the stars in the sky. Rebuilding the universe, is it possible? She still found it hard to accept. On the other side, Chen Tao and Rose returned to base number 1. After passing through the micro-wormhole, Chen Tao looked back and saw the micro-wormhole slowly closing. The micro-wormhole closed. There was a fragrance around him, and Rose came to Chen Tao, her arms around Chen Tao's neck, her eyes looking straight at Chen Tao. The four eyes met. Rose approached Chen Tao and took the initiative to kiss him. Lips parted. Rose's eyes were filled with joy, and the corners of her mouth were slightly raised. Chen Tao smiled and put his arm around her slender waist. Among Chen Tao's women, he never expected Rose to be so passionate and courageous. He Yuxuan is relatively courageous, but compared with Rose, there is still a big gap. Rose wore a loose and thin white shirt, casually dressed, fitting her mature figure. The bust held up the shirt high, the waist was slender, and the hem of the shirt was down. The pair of long legs, which were enough to be 1.2 meters long, were slender and straight, and looked flawless. The delicate and smooth light gray skin and the pair of pointed ears not only did not destroy her beauty, but also added a few minutes of exotic style to her. Make the already charming Rose look even more charming. "Dear," a voice came from the side. Chen Tao came back to his senses and looked at Wu Yao beside him, but saw Wu Yao looking up. Chen Tao looked up and saw Fang Lin flapping her dragon wings and flying in the air. Because she was outside the shield, she couldn't get in. Lin was looking at Chen Tao, her eyes shining. Chen Tao's eyebrows slightly stretched, and he said, "Base number 1, remove the shield." The shield was removed. Lin spread her wings and flew down. The shield was restored. Chen Tao thought Lin would stop, but he didn't expect a fragrant breeze to blow. Lin threw herself into Chen Tao's arms, hugged Chen Tao's waist tightly, buried her little head beside Chen Tao's shoulder, and said, "Dear, I miss you so much." Chen Tao was slightly stunned. Long Renlin, what are you doing? Rose on the side looked at the scene in confusion. When Lin heard this, she came out of Chen Tao's arms. She looked at Rose and said, "What are you doing? Can't you see? Rose, compared to you, I knew him earlier than you, long before you knew him, I am already his. First come, first served, you should also call me sister." "Sister," Rose crossed her arms, showing a playful smile, and said, "I remember it's only been 1,000 years since you transformed from an ordinary human in the Rakra civilization to a dragon, right? As for me, I've lived to it's been 7 million years, and you want me to call you sister? I'm afraid you can't bear it." Lin said, "This kind of thing does not depend on age. Also, at your age of 7 million years, an old woman like you has no shame in harming my dear ones." Lin's ridicule had no effect on Rose. Instead, Rose showed a smile and said, "Then I am better than your queen. I have lived for so long and am still single. I guess I have never been married to a man in my life. Hold it in your arms." Lin's face darkened, she raised her hand, and a silver white sword appeared, pointing the tip at Rose. "How dare you humiliate my queen?" She was angry. Rose curled her lips and said with a smile, "You can humiliate me, but I can't humiliate your queen? What's the truth? Do you want to fight? Come on, do you think I'm afraid of you?" Rose looked at Lin haughtily, with disdain on her face. Lin bit her lower lip and was about to take action. "Okay," Chen Tao said. "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 116. Seeing Chen Tao speak, Rose and Lin's eyes fell on Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, "Now Rose is no longer the black demon queen who believes in chaos." He looked at Lin and said, "There is no need to confront each other." Lin pursed her lower lip, but didn't know what to say. Chen Tao looked at Rose and said, "You too, for Lin, Katie is her king. It's not right for you to humiliate her queen like this." Rose winked her big eyes mischievously, a smile appeared on her face, and said, "Okay." She looked at Lin and said, "Sorry, I was wrong. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have made fun of your most respected queen." Seeing Rose apologize, although her expression seemed to be the same as before, no matter what she said, Rose apologized. Lin couldn't continue to have conflicts with Rose. She said, "I was also wrong. I shouldn't have ridiculed you." Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "Well, that's good." With that said, Chen Tao looked at Lin and said, "You are Katie's left guard. Aren't you going back with Katie now?" When Lin heard this, she looked at Chen Tao, smiled, and said, "You don't have to. The queen knows that I like you. She asked me to stay and fulfill my duties as your woman. Dragon Man, are you starting to engage in surveillance now? Is Katie afraid that Chen Tao will do something?" Suddenly, Rose spoke up. Hearing this, Lin's smile faded. She frowned and glanced at Rose. Rose smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'm just talking, there's no harm in it. After all, it's a bit strange for you to keep talking like this." Lin said, "I am a civilized dragon and disdain to do surveillance. I believe it is Chen Tao, then it is him. I will unconditionally support whatever he wants to do." If Chen Tao wants to do evil, I will accompany him. Betray him, it's absolutely impossible for me to do it. Even if it's your queen's order, Rose said playfully. Upon hearing this, Lin tightened her grip on the sword in her hand. Rose smiled playfully and said, "Don't be angry, I was just saying something." Lin looked at Chen Tao beside her and said very seriously, "I swear to my faith, if I betray you, I..." Before Lin could say the next sentence, Chen Tao said, "No need to swear." Lin was startled and looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at Lin and said, "I believe you." Lin looked at Chen Tao, her eyes glowed with a hint of splendor, and a smile gradually appeared on her face. Seeing this, Rose also smiled. She walked to Chen Tao, held Chen Tao's arm, looked at Lin, and said, "Tao believes in you, then I believe in you too." Lin glanced at Rose and frowned. Seeing Rose, she still felt uncomfortable. "Dear," suddenly, a voice came from beside me. Chen Tao came back to his senses and looked at the person next to him. Zi Ching was wearing a smart outfit and a pair of cylindrical high-heeled boots. She stood upright. She looked here and said, "Lunch is ready." Chen Tao looked at Zi Ching in front of him and found that Zi Ching had cut her hair short at some point. Zi Ching has a tall and mature figure, perfect measurements, exquisite facial features and an oval face. With this short hair, she looks much more capable. Only. Chen Tao walked up to Zi Ching, raised his hand, stroked her hair, and said, "Why did you cut your hair short?" When Zi Ching heard this, she looked at Chen Tao and said, "This makes training easier. I want to become stronger." "Why do you want to become strong?" Chen Tao looked into Zi Ching's eyes. Zi Ching pursed her lower lip and said, "In that case, I can stay by your side." Seeing Zi Ching slowly lower her head, she felt a little depressed. Chen Tao was silent for a moment. He wordlessly held Zi Ching's face, slowly moved closer, and kissed her. Uneasy. Yes, Zi Ching must be very uneasy. More and more women are pestering Chen Tao, and Zi Ching doesn't mind the fact that there are other women around Chen Tao. But watching the sisters next to her getting better and better, she was so ordinary. Looking at the time Chen Tao spent with her, it gradually became less and less. Of course Zi Ching would be uneasy. She is just an ordinary person from the slums. Compared to exotic beauties like Rose and Lin, she has no sense of existence. Compared to He Yuxuan and Wu Yao, she is also very weak. Zi Ching is not afraid that there are many girls around Chen Tao. What she is afraid of is that Chen Tao will no longer love her. Therefore, she has to work harder and train more to improve her abilities. A deep kiss, lips parted. Chen Tao looked at Zi Ching's face. Zi Ching's eyelashes moved and she slowly opened her eyes. Her eyes were filled with moisture. Chen Tao held her in his arms. Zi Ching's face turned slightly red. "Tao, lunch is ready." Chen Tao looked at Zi Ching in his arms and said, "Nothing is more important than you." Hearing this, Zi Ching's heart skipped a beat, and her eyes looked at Chen Tao with a hint of brilliance. For a moment, Zi Ching realized that she was thinking too much. Her little head slowly rested on Chen Tao's shoulder, and there was a joyful smile on her face. In his heart, she still has enough status. Zi Ching felt a little relieved. Chen Tao carried Zi Ching into the miniature wormhole and returned to the room. Put Zi Ching on the bed. He held her hand and looked into Zi Ching's eyes. Zi Ching's eyes were shining, and she slowly closed her eyes. Lin and Rose looked at the direction Chen Tao left, looking at the slowly closing miniature wormhole. Rose crossed her arms. Lin looked at Rose and said, "Zicking, but Chen Tao's favorite woman, you will never be able to surpass her in this life." When Rose heard this, she smiled, looked at Lin, and said with a smile, "She is my sister, why should I surpass her?" "Your thoughts are a bit dangerous, Xiao Linlin." Lin frowned, Don't call me Xiao Linlin. Rose laughed and walked away. Looking at Rose's back, Lin bit her lip. It's really infuriating. 6 hours passed. Chen Tao looked at Ziking. Ziking was lying on her side, looking straight at Chen Tao, with a smile on her face and a hint of light in her eyes. Chen Tao gently stroked her face and looked at her short hair. Ziking held Chen Tao's hand and said softly, "Has it become ugly?" Chen Tao smiled and said, "No, it looks pretty good." "That's good." Ziking smiled and said, "You taught me to use the micro wormhole before, and then people need to move. Long hair feels a bit of a hindrance. I'm actually a little scared, worried that you don't like it." She leaned her head on Chen Tao's arms. Chen Tao gently stroked her hair, smelled her fragrance, and said softly, "I've been too cold to you recently. I'm sorry, I made you uneasy." Ziking's heart warmed, and she slowly closed her eyes. "As long as you have me in your heart, I'm fine." Chen Tao said, "If there is anything, just say it directly, don't suppress it in your heart." "Well." Ziking responded obediently. Ziking is very considerate. She always hides her unhappy things and then shows her best side to Chen Tao. People can't see her pain. Due to her personality, there is no way to change. Ziking is very pitiful. Suddenly, Chen Tao felt empty in front of him. He was slightly startled, but found that Ziking, who was still in his arms just now, disappeared. Ziking disappeared out of thin air? Chen Tao's face sank slightly. It was a wormhole transmission. Someone forcibly teleported Ziking away in front of Chen Tao without Ziking's consent. "Chen Tao, let me introduce myself first. I am Bai Yao, the White Dragon King of the Dragon Civilization. Now your woman is in my hands. If you don't want her to get into trouble, come to the Dragon City immediately, understand?" The arrogant female voice sounded in Chen Tao's head. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao's fist slowly clenched. Ziking was his reverse scale, and this woman touched his reverse scale. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 117. Chen Tao turned on his genetic ability and closed his eyes. He is the universe at this moment, and the universe is him. He can perceive everything that the universe can perceive. He now wants to find where Zi Ching is. Found it? Chen Tao opened his eyes and his figure disappeared into thin air. When he appeared again, Chen Tao appeared in an empty hall. Chen Tao saw Zi Ching standing next to him. When Zi Ching saw Chen Tao, her eyes lit up slightly. "Tao." Seeing Zi Ching, Chen Tao's high-spirited heart slowly fell. Chen Tao raised his hand and gently stroked Zi Ching's hair. "Are you okay?" Zi Ching nodded slightly and said, "It's okay." Saying that, Zi Ching looked forward. Chen Tao looked along Zi Ching's line of sight. Directly in front is a high platform. There is a high and luxurious chair on the high platform, and a woman is sitting on the chair. The woman crossed her legs, leaned on the back of the chair, and looked here playfully. This woman had a pair of dragon horns, and the horns Chen Tao had seen were all black. But this woman's dragon horns are pure white. There is a pair of dragon wings behind her that are also pure white, and her skin is as white jade, beautiful and flawless. She was wearing soft armor and a white trench coat, crossed her legs, and looked here playfully. Meet Chen Tao's gaze. The woman showed a smile, stood up slowly, and said, "I thought it would take some time for you to come over, but I didn't expect you to come over now." She picked up the silver-white sword that was placed aside. Different from the swords held by ordinary dragon warriors, the sword in this woman's hand was special, both in terms of material and appearance. The woman came down from the stage step by step. Chen Tao looked at Zi Ching beside him and said, "Hide for a moment." Zi Ching nodded slightly and stepped aside. Chen Tao looked at the woman in front of him and said, "Who are you?" When the woman heard this, she stretched her eyebrows slightly and said with a smile, Didn't I introduce myself just now? I am Bai Yao, the king of White Dragon, well, or should be said to be the former king of White Dragon. I used to talk to Kadi was the double king, maintaining the balance of the universe, and then I got tired of it and retired. Bai Yao looked at Chen Tao and said, however, whenever there is a threat to the universe, I have to take action to protect it. And this time Bai Yao pointed the long sword in his hand at Chen Tao and said, I can feel that you are in danger. Bai Yao's smile faded slightly, and his face became more solemn. Bai Yao stared at Chen Tao and said, your existence is a threat to the balance of this universe. Although KD believes that you will not threaten this universe, your threat is too great. I have to face it? Chen Tao frowned and said, is this why you caught Ziyiqing here? Hearing this, Bai Yao said calmly, Cardi said that your genetic code is very special. Outside, I am not your opponent. But it is different here. I can't analyze you, so naturally I can't use wormhole transfer on you, but your woman is different. If she is here, you will definitely come over. As long as you step into my territory, everything will be different. Bai Yao said, I own a celestial computer, which I call the White Dragon Sword. Unlike the Dragon King's Academy, my White Dragon Sword exists for fighting since it was built. It can change the rules and structure of space. Bai Yao said lightly, I have used the White Dragon Sword to make regulations for this hall. There is no way to use micro wormholes here, and there is no way to use the power of genes in the body. In other words, there is no way to remotely control the sharp silver weapon. Bai Yao looked at Chen Tao and said, to put it simply, if we want to fight now, we can only fight with our own weapons and our own fighting skills. Bai Yao showed a playful smile, you don't seem to have the habit of carrying weapons with you. Chen Tao's eyebrows slightly stretched, he looked at Bai Yao and said, you want to fight me? Can you give me a reason? Speaking of this, Chen Tao still didn't quite understand why Bai Yao wanted to fight Chen Tao. Bai Yao narrowed his eyes and said, are you stupid? I said that your existence will pose a threat to this universe, so all I have to do is exclude you. After the words fell, Bai Yao rushed towards Chen Tao, and the silver sword in his hand swept towards Chen Tao. Chen Tao stepped back, narrowly avoiding Bai Yao's attack. Bai Yao smiled and said, the sword in my hand is a sharp silver weapon. Even the third-generation gene will be easily cut into two pieces by this weapon. You have to be careful. A sharp silver weapon? Frankly speaking, Chen Tao did not intend to be struck by this sharp silver weapon, but after losing his genetic ability, Chen Tao was just an ordinary person. Chen Tao is not a fighter, he has no fighting skills. Facing Bai Yao's attack, Chen Tao certainly had nothing to do. Bai Yao's second blow came oncoming. Chiang. There was a sound of a collision between hard objects and hard objects. The sharp silver sword slashed at Chen Tao's waist. Bai Yao's smile slowly froze. Because she was shocked to find that her sword could not cut into Chen Tao's body. Bai Yao frowned. She twisted her waist, raised her foot, and kicked Chen Tao in the stomach. As soon as he kicked, a shock force came from the sole of his foot. Bai Yao's body flew out upside down. Bang! Bai Yao's body fell to the ground. Bai Yao was stunned. She struggled to get up, looked at Chen Tao, and then looked at the sharp silver sword in her hand. She frowned and looked at Chen Tao, what generation of genes are you? Sharp silver is the sharpest substance in the known universe. The sharp silver is a weapon made of it, which is the sharpest in the known universe. Even the third generation of genes can be easily cut off by the sharp silver. But the scene in front of her was completely beyond Bai Yao's expectations. Her sword had clearly cut Chen Tao, but it couldn't cut into him. The sharp silver weapon that can easily cut any substance in the known universe actually encountered a substance that can't be cut today. Looking at Bai Yao's somewhat serious and solemn face, Chen Tao said lightly, guess it yourself. Bai Yao pursed her lips and slowly stood up. She pounced on Chen Tao again, and the sharp silver sword in her hand cut Chen Tao's body again. Clang clang clang. Chen Tao did not dodge, letting the sword fall on him. The sword slashed at him, except for a little cut on his bathrobe. Bai Yao couldn't cut Chen Tao's hair. Chen Tao was annoyed by Bai Yao's behavior, and he raised his hand to grab Bai Yao's hand. Bai Yao retreated suddenly as if she was threatened, keeping a distance of more than 5 meters from Chen Tao. She looked at Chen Tao with a solemn expression. Chen Tao looked at Bai Yao and said, "Have you had enough fun?" Bai Yao was startled, and she frowned. "Who is playing with you?" She was fighting very seriously. But to Chen Tao, her fighting was just like a child playing, no, or her attack power was much lower than that of a child playing. Chen Tao said, "You have played enough, it's my turn next. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 118. A miniature wormhole appeared next to Bai Yao. A silver-white rope flew out and instantly tied up Bai Yao before he could react. Bai Yao's body was tied up and she fell to the ground. Her face changed slightly and she said, "This is a tough silver item. Why can you use genetic abilities?" Chen Tao used a micro wormhole, but the problem is the space. She has asked the White Dragon Sword to restrict the rules. Genetic abilities cannot be used here. Chen Tao said, "Your White Dragon Sword's data processing capabilities are not as good as the Dragon King's Academy. If you want to compare computer performance with me, you are wishful thinking." Bai Yao was stunned. She stared at Chen Tao and said, "You also have the support of the celestial computer." Chen Tao looked at Bai Yao, and he had an idea. Bai Yao was pulled up by the tough silver rope and brought to Chen Tao. Chen Tao stared at Bai Yao and said calmly, "I am good at everything, but what I can't bear the most is when someone attacks the people around me. Especially Ziyi Qing, but you just touched Ziyi Qing." Bai Yao bit his lower lip. Chen Tao waved his hand. Crack. There was a crisp sound. Bai Yao's face turned to one side, and there was a bright red palm print on his fair cheek. Chen Tao said, "If you were not a woman, you would be a corpse today. This slap is my warning to you. If there is a next time, then don't blame me for being rude." Bai Yao looked away and looked at Chen Tao, his eyes filled with moisture. The tough silver rope loosened. Bai Yao fell to the ground. The rope entered the micro wormhole. Chen Tao turned around, looked at Ziyi Qing, and said, "Go back." Ziyi Qing nodded slightly. Chen Tao came over, put his arm around Ziyi Qing's slender waist, opened a miniature wormhole, and left with Ziyi Qing. Watching the two people leave, Bai Yao slowly stood up and patted the clothes on his body, as if he wanted to pat away the dust on his body. "Did something happen?" came a faint voice. Bai Yao turned around and looked at the chair where Katie was sitting on the stage, looking over here. Bai Yao said, "Are you back?" Katie showed a smile and said, "I just came back. After I came back, I felt something was not right here, so I came over to take a look. That man is not the same person you dealt with before. Playing with him, there is only a chance that someone will be injured. It's you." Bai Yao pursed his lower lip and said, "You told me before that his power is indescribable. I was just curious about what he was capable of. Now I have seen it. That guy is indeed terrifying." She looked at the direction Chen Tao left and said, "I have seen everything in the 7 million years I have lived, but I have never seen a man as powerful as him. I feel that the level of technology he is at is different from ours, not on the same level." Caddy said, "He was not even injured by the sharp silver weapon. It seems that what he said before was not a joke." When Bai Yao heard this, she looked at Katie. "What are you talking about?" Katie said, "It was Rose who said that Chen Tao has the ability to reconstruct the universe." The ability to reconstruct the universe. Bai Yao's usually calm voice rose a few decibels at this moment. She looked at Katie in disbelief and said, "How is this possible?" I don't think it's possible either, Katie said lightly, but I think Rose is full of confidence in him, and even gives up her faith for it. Now Rose seems to only have eyes for this man. If he couldn't build the universe, Rose wouldn't be able to do that. Bai Yao nodded solemnly. If that's the case, that man's value is very great. Katie looked at Bai Yao and said, the balance of the universe, do you think he will threaten the balance of our universe? When Bai Yao heard this, she looked at Katie. She couldn't help but smile and said, no, he is not that kind of person. I used your Dragon King's Academy to calculate what he has experienced since his birth. He is kind, powerful, gentle, and friendly. If he threatens the balance of the universe, then there is no one in this universe who does not threaten the balance of the universe. Bai Yao looked at Katie and said, Lin mentioned before that he will be the hope of our dragon people. What do you think? Upon hearing this, Katie fell silent for a moment and said, maybe, let's see how Lin gets along with him. The hope of dragon people, what does this statement mean? Chen Tao didn't know, and he wasn't interested in finding out. For Chen Tao, what he wants is not to conquer the universe, nor does he like to go out and fight. What he thought was very simple. That is to have a safe and quiet place to spend every day and night peacefully with the woman you love. After Chen Tao took Ziyiqing back, he continued to live a peaceful and comfortable life as before. However, the quiet life did not last long, only lasting for half a month. Half a month later. Honey. Chen Tao heard the sound while sleeping. This sound does not come from the ears, but from the brain. This is the sound coming from the channel. This voice is very familiar, it should be He Yuxuan's voice. Chen Tao opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling in the sky. What's wrong? Chen Tao asked. Something happened to Li Xiaolu and we need help, dear. He Yuxuan's voice was filled with embarrassment. Chen Tao turned his head and saw that Rose was lying in Chen Tao's arms like a kitten, with her eyes closed and sleeping soundly. Half of her body was nestled in his arms, making it difficult for Chen Tao to move. Seeing this, Chen Tao got up carefully and asked He Yuxuan, what's the matter? It's like this. Li Xiaolu and I were curious for a while, so we ran to the Xingai civilization closest to us, and then, we were caught. Now He Yuxuan's voice was a little embarrassed. Hearing this, Chen Tao frowned. He got out of bed and put on his clothes. These days, in order to ensure the safety of the girls, Chen Tao helped them upgrade their genes and taught them some methods of using genes so that they could protect themselves. But Chen Tao never expected that He Yuxuan and Li Xiaolu would give him such a surprise. They actually ran to another civilization and were caught by another civilization? This kind of thing is not a good thing. However, Chen Tao was not in a hurry. Both of them had the ability of the third-generation gene. Xingai civilization was just a civilization in the cold weapon era. It was still difficult to hurt them. Can't run away, Chen Tao said. We are tied up and can't move. We can build a micro wormhole, but we can't get in, He Yuxuan said. Hearing this, Chen Tao said, I know, then I'll go and see. Chen Tao's perception spread out. Looking for the breath of He Yuxuan and Li Xiaolu. Found it? Chen Tao's figure disappeared on the spot. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 119. When he appeared again, Chen Tao felt a chill all around. His body entered a cool sea water. He found himself in the sea, surrounded by sea water. He landed on the seabed and slowly stood firm. Fortunately, Chen Tao's genes had been upgraded, so even in the sea, it was not much different from being on land. Chen Tao looked forward and saw two beautiful figures. It was He Yuxuan and Li Xiaolu. But the two women were trapped on two protruding stone pillars. The clothes on He Yuxian and Li Xiaolu were tattered. Although their genetically upgraded bodies were not injured, the clothes probably could not withstand the attacks of the enemies. When He Yuxian saw Chen Tao, she smiled. "Husband, you are so nice." He Yuxian's voice rang in Chen Tao's head. Chen Tao was too lazy to say anything more. The ropes tied to He Yuxian and Li Xiaolu disappeared out of thin air and were directly resolved. He Yuxian swam and threw herself into Chen Tao's arms. She raised her face and kissed Chen Tao. Their lips parted. He Yuxian's big eyes were filled with joy. Chen Tao looked at He Yuxian, and seeing that she was fine, he looked at Li Xiaolu beside him. Li Xiaolu lowered her head apologetically and said, "Big brother, I'm sorry, Xiaolu got into trouble." Hearing this, Chen Tao said, "It's okay." He raised his hand and touched Li Xiaolu's hair. Feeling Chen Tao's tenderness, Li Xiaolu's eyes lit up slightly, and she looked at Chen Tao with a hint of luster in her eyes. At this time, a group of figures suddenly appeared next to them. A super large net, from top to bottom, enveloped Chen Tao and the other two. "It's a mermaid." He Yuxian's face changed slightly. Chen Tao's thoughts moved. He Yuxian and Li Xiaolu disappeared on the spot. The net caught Chen Tao. At the moment of being caught, Chen Tao saw countless harpoons inserted and stabbed Chen Tao. The sharp harpoon hit Chen Tao's body, but it only made a hole in Chen Tao's clothes. Chen Tao's figure disappeared from the spot, and when he appeared again, he was 10 meters away from the spot. His eyes fell on the position just now. "There are 5 people over there? They are called people, they do look like people, with bare upper bodies, and the 5 are probably men, with muscular bodies, strong hands, holding harpoons in their hands, but their lower bodies are fish. It's a bit like the mermaids in mythology, but they are male mermaids, nothing to see." Seeing Chen Tao suddenly disappear, the 5 people were a little confused at first, and then looked in the direction of Chen Tao. They pounced on Chen Tao again, and the fish tails flapped, and quickly rushed towards Chen Tao. The speed was very fast. Chen Tao's thought moved, and the half-moon blade emerged and turned. The harpoons in the hands of the 5 people broke with a sound. Without weapons, the 5 people were stunned on the spot again. They looked at the weapons in their hands, and then looked at Chen Tao, and seemed to not know what to do. Chen Tao said, "Why did you attack us?" Chen Tao used code to edit a translator, and what he said was automatically converted into a language that the other party could understand. The 5 people on the other side heard what Chen Tao said, and they looked at each other. One of them walked out, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Can you speak our language?" Chen Tao did not speak, but waited quietly, because the other party still did not answer his question. The man said, "You invaded our territory, so you are the enemy, and we must catch you if you are the enemy. The 2 before could not speak our language, but you can speak it, so it's easy. What are you doing in our territory? Why did you invade our territory? And what is the thing on your lower body? What is the thing on your lower body?" This sentence should probably be asked by Chen Tao. However, in other words, it is true that the man probably has never seen a foot in his life, because they are all human beings with fish tails, and for them, feet is indeed an unknown thing. Chen Tao crossed his arms and said, "I am not from your world. We are from outside. We are just passing by here. We have no ill will towards you." The 5 people looked at each other with surprise. If he is not from this world, then he must be a god, right? It is possible. After all, I don't remember anything that looks like that. It is a god, it must be. The thing that just destroyed our weapons must be a divine weapon. Listening to the discussion of these people, Chen Tao couldn't help but blink. God. It seems that they have misunderstood. However, it is normal for them to misunderstand. After all, they are still in the ice weapon age, and what they hold in their hands is just a cold weapon similar to a harpoon. But what Chen Tao just used is a sharp silver weapon with the ability to attack from a distance. The gap between weapons is too big. When facing something they can't understand, they will naturally regard it as a miracle. Chen Tao knew that this was a misunderstanding and didn't bother to say anything more. Since the reason for their attack on Li Xiaolu and the others has been figured out, there is no need to stay any longer. His figure disappeared on the spot. Ah! God left. It's God, it's really God. The 5 people knelt on the bottom of the sea in horror, worshipping in the direction where Chen Tao left. At the same time, Chen Tao's figure had returned to room number 1 of the base. In the room, He Yuxuan and Li Xiaolu were sitting on the sofa, and Rose was sitting next to them, crossing her legs and drinking tea. Seeing Chen Tao, Rose's eyes lit up slightly, and she smiled. "Dear, come, sit here." She hurriedly stood up. Seeing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly, walked to Rose and sat down. Rose also sat next to Chen Tao, half of her body nestled in Chen Tao's arms. Chen Tao looked at Li Xiaolu and the other 2 girls beside him and said, "Why did you go there?" Li Xiaolu suddenly stood up, she lowered her head apologetically, and said, "I'm just curious about other civilizations outside. On the contrary, I heard that there is a Xingai civilization closest to us, so I asked the location and went to see it. I just didn't expect them to be like that." "Sorry, I was wrong." Li Xiaolu lowered her head. Chen Tao looked at Li Xiaolu, then looked at He Yuxuan, and said, "What about you?" He Yuxuan pursed her thin lips. Li Xiaolu said, "After I was arrested, I didn't dare to contact you, brother Chen Tao. I contacted sister Yuxuan, and the result was. As a result, I was also arrested." He Yuxuan pursed her lips and smiled awkwardly. Chen Tao looked at Li Xiaolu, who was a little apologetic and uneasy. Li Xiaolu lives here. Although the people around Chen Tao are kind people, no matter what, Li Xiaolu is still young and sensitive. It's not good to scold her now. And, to be honest, there is nothing wrong with what Li Xiaolu did. It's just because the other party's territorial consciousness is too strong that they are treated like that. Chen Tao said, "It's nothing to be interested in things outside. It's okay for you to learn to use wormhole displacement and want to go to those places. Just pay more attention to safety." Yeah, Li Xiaolu looked at Chen Tao and nodded slightly. Chen Tao said, "I also know why you were attacked. You entered their territory before, and they have a strong sense of territory, so you were attacked. So that's how it is." He Yuxuan looked as if she suddenly realized. "Xiaolu, are you interested in other civilizations?" At this time, Rose beside her said. Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Rose. Rose smiled and said, "If you are interested, I have something here that can help you. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 120. As she spoke, she raised her hand, reached into the miniature wormhole, and took out a mirror from inside. She let go, and the mirror seemed to be pulled by invisible force and brought to Li Xiaolu. Li Xiaolu raised her hand to take it, and she looked at Rose. Rose smiled and said, "There are countless civilizations in the universe. Through this mirror, you can see the conditions of other civilizations." Hearing this, Li Xiaolu's eyes lit up slightly, a smile appeared on her face, she looked at Rose and said, "Thank you, Sister Rose." Rose had a smile on her face. Chen Tao could tell that Rose was very happy. Rose has been fighting with Katie for 5 million years. She has always been on top, enjoying the supreme status and rights. But similarly, she also lost friends because no one was qualified to be her friend. And now when she heard Li Xiaolu's name, Sister Rose, she was so happy. Chen Tao is just an ordinary person, and he still cannot understand Rose's joy. "Sister Rose, what is this?" Hearing the sound, Rose smiled and said, "Bring it here, let me take a look." Li Xiaolu came to Rose with small steps, and she moved the mirror in front of Rose. Rose was sitting next to Chen Tao. Rose could see it, and so could Chen Tao. The mirror was like a computer screen, playing a picture. Through the screen, Chen Tao can see what is inside the screen. They were a group of humanoid creatures. Although they were creatures, they were all somewhat different. Their components are not cells or genes, but a mass of matter and water. The people in the picture are all made of water. They have human shapes but no human appearance. Rose said, "This is the elemental body." Elemental body, Li Xiaolu looked at Rose curiously. Rose nodded slightly and said, "There are currently two types of life in this known universe. One is the genetic body composed of flesh and blood, and the other is this kind of intelligent life bred from matter. Universal elemental life has high intelligence," Rose said. "If it is generated, then the elemental body will have performance comparable to the second generation gene at birth. However, the requirements for nurturing elemental bodies are extremely high, and elemental bodies are it's difficult to generate, so it's very rare. Because elemental bodies are rare, the known universe is dominated by genetic bodies, and elemental bodies generally only stay on their own planets." Li Xiaolu, who had gained more knowledge, had a smile on her face. She held the mirror and looked quietly. Looking at this scene, Rose smiled. Chen Tao looked at Rose. At this moment, Rose looked at Li Xiaolu with quite gentle eyes. Looking at Rose and Li Xiaolu now, they look like an older sister and a younger sister. "Sister Rose, what about this?" Li Xiaolu looked at Rose. When Rose heard this, she smiled and said, "Let me see." Her eyes fell on the mirror. Upon seeing it, the smile on Rose's face faltered and her eyebrows furrowed. Noticing the change in Rose's expression, Chen Tao also looked into the screen. In the picture, there is a woman, but what makes up this woman's body is not genes. Like the previous elemental body, this woman is made of water. But it is different from the previous elemental bodies that were only humanoid. This woman is very delicate, with a curvy figure. She is also wearing clothes made of thin ice. She has a pair of clear eyes and delicate facial features. And hair made of water. This is a complete person. The woman seemed to feel something and looked this way. She seemed to feel someone watching her. She raised her hand. The screen disappears. Li Xiaolu looked at Rose. Rose looked at Li Xiaolu and said, "She is also an elemental body, but she is different from other elemental bodies. She seems to have evolved." Rose said, "Frankly speaking, I have never seen such a perfectly evolved elemental body before. It seems that in the past 5 million years, the elemental body has begun to evolve." Rose frowned. Chen Tao noticed that Rose's expression was dignified and serious. Could it be that this matter was serious? Li Xiaolu didn't feel anything. Li Xiaolu felt that she was just watching TV. What happened on TV was too far away for her. "Well, there is another picture," Li Xiaolu said. "This is..." Li Xiaolu's eyes trembled slightly when she saw the scene in front of her. Chen Tao looked through the mirror and could see that it was a city. The city looks a little different from the architectural style of Chen Tao's Earth Star City, but Chen Tao can be sure that it is indeed a city. But at this moment, the sky in the city was dark, the entire city was submerged in water, and people were floating on the water and crying. And in this city, there is a huge thing made of water, like a mountain, standing in the middle of the city, and with a wave of his hand, the building shatters. Like a huge monster, destroying the city. Chen Tao could see that Rose's expression completely changed at this moment. The elemental body invaded the genetic body's planet. Rose looked a little more shocked. "It's a dragon-like sister Lin." Li Xiaolu noticed a picture through the mirror, and her eyes lit up slightly. Through the screen, you can see a flame flying down from the sky. The flames passed through the clouds and slowly stopped above the behemoth, revealing its true appearance. This person was clearly Longren Qiao, who had met Chen Tao several times at that time. "Isn't this Sister Qiao?" Li Xiaolu recognized Qiao's identity. After all, Chiao had been here before and she had seen her. Li Xiaolu looked at Rose. Sister Rose, why is Sister Chiao there? Rose said lightly, the dragon people believe in the balance of the universe. They always regard the balance of civilization as their responsibility. Like what is happening in front of us, that behemoth is obviously an alien elemental invader. For such invaders, the dragon people naturally cannot ignore it. The civilization you see now that is invaded by the elemental body is probably the jurisdiction of the dragon people Chiao. Naturally, Chiao has to take action. So that's the case. Li Xiaolu smiled and said, then we have to cheer for Sister Chiao. Come on, Rose crossed her arms and said, it's probably difficult to cheer again. Li Xiaolu was startled, and she looked at Rose. At this time, the people in the picture. Dragon people Chiao looked down at the city below that was swallowed by the crazy sea water, and her eyes fell on the behemoth. Dragon Man Zhou frowned, raised the silver-white longsword in his hand, and pounced on the giant. Stupid, Rose said. The longsword in Dragon Man Zhou's hand slashed at the giant. The sword swept past, slashing through a piece of water, splashing water. But it recovered after a while. Just like a person slashing water in the water, it has no effect at all. Seeing that there was no effect, Dragon Man Zhou pounced on the giant again. The long sword in her hand was flying, and she attacked the giant frantically. Water splashed. But the effect was minimal. At this time, the giant seemed to be angered by Dragon Man Zhou, and opened the big hand made of water to grab Dragon Man Zhou. Dragon Man Zhou flapped his dragon wings and dodged one by one. Although the thing was huge, it was very clumsy. It couldn't catch up with Dragon Man Zhou's speed. Suddenly, a big hand rose from below. Dragon Man Zhou was caught off guard and was grabbed by the big hand. Zhou was instantly swallowed by the water.